Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. My name is Dabney and I'm an evolutionary astrologer. And today I am excited to welcome back Nick Dagan Best. Nick came on a few weeks ago. I don't know, I lose track of time at this point. And he was definitely very popular and people were so excited that he was on, and we had been riffing about Gen X. And so we decided to do it one more time, but actually do a deep dive on the astrology of Generation X. So there's really nobody who is going to have more information about the astrology of Generation X than two Gen Xers who are astrologers and been doing this for decades. And so if that's content you're interested in, I really do hope you stick around. And what we do here on this channel is we take the stars and the cosmos and the planetary energy, and we bring it down here and we try to make sense of it to help us live a more peace-filled and conscious life. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Dabney. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, I loved the conversation we had last time. So a little bit before we get going, a little bit of business. Last time you were on, you were having a special. So
Yes.
Nick actually is like, in case you are not familiar and you're just stumbling upon this, Nick is like one of the legends in our current astrological field. And he's often featured on the Astrology podcast. He's been an astrologer for decades. He calls himself a Neo-Babylonian astrologer, which I like. So he basically takes the ancient stuff and he brings it and makes it modern, and so we can understand it. So he uses a different house system than I do. So that's the cool thing about astrology is, we can all kind of collaborate. But I actually got a reading from Nick after the last time he came on because I couldn't believe how affordable his rates were. And so he is actually running the special again that he did last time. So if you want to get a reading from Nick, his prices are going to go up in mid-August, but between now and July 21st, he's having a special. Use the code Uranus. I will put the information all below on how you can get a reading from Nick, but he also has a Patreon. And I highly encourage you to check that out if you are resonant with his work and like you really are interested in his history and astrology, which I know a lot of people on this channel are. He is launching on his YouTube a new series about Uranus and the Uranus USA return. So do you want to just briefly talk about your new series that's happening on
Yeah.
your YouTube channel?
Yeah. Thank you, Dabney. That's right. So, number one, my website is nickdaganbest.com, and go to my consultation page. And if you book a reading with me, you can enter the promo code Uranus for a 25% rebate, I believe it is, if I remember correctly. And excuse me. And the other thing is my new video essay series. This is something I've always been meaning to do, but I feel like my skill set and the zeitgeist have collaborated on my behalf, and this is the perfect time to do this. I'm starting with what I want to be a three-part video series that is a sort of second edition of my book, Uranus USA, which was a book I self-published in 2013 that talked about the astrology of 2025 relative to American history, global history, and yeah, and how the past might give us hints in terms of determining how the future might go. So that video series is in the works. It's really great, and I'm very proud of it. And I'll be launching a trailer by the time this interview is released on the internet. So
That's excellent.
yeah.
So everybody has to go over to Nick's YouTube and hit subscribe. And if you want the content early, or you really just want to support Nick's work, you can join his Patreon. So all that's going to be below. And then now I have to talk about my special, my discount. Sorry, there's a lot going on in the month of July because people need astrology right now. And so yes, get a reading from Nick. And then if you want to learn astrology and you don't know how to read your own chart. You just are completely lost when it comes to all the astro babble. I'm specialized, a little different than Nick. I specialize in breaking it down and making it very easy for people to understand. And so for the month of July only, my Astrology Foundations class, which is pre-recorded, is half off. So it is only $39, and you get a ton of video content, you get a ton of downloads, you get a ton of really good information, including a recorded video with my teacher, Steven Forrest, who came on and answered some questions for people. So good stuff. Let's talk about being Gen Xers, shall we?
Let's do this.
Okay. So it was funny because I had sort of asked Nick if he wanted to do this. Then he came back and said, yeah, let's do it. And then we had this little kind of interesting moment where we both realized that Nick is a Pluto and Virgo Gen Xer, and I am a Pluto and Libra Gen Xer. And so when I did my Pluto and the Generations video, I really kind of broke it down into like Gen X part 1 and Gen X part 2. And there's a lot of overlap in the experiences, but they definitely have some different flavors. And so for those who don't know, Generation X is the generation of people born between 1965 and 1984. Now, I know plenty of older millennials that feel more akin to Gen X, and I know plenty of younger Gen Xers that kind of feel a little bit more like boomers. And so that's where I kind of feel like Pluto is a really good demarcation. And both Pluto in Virgo and Pluto in Libra were shorter periods of time than we see with Pluto now. Like Pluto's going to be in Aquarius for 20 years. So anyway, I'm just going to throw that little piece over the wall. Do you want to talk a little bit about those two pieces?
Yeah, yeah. I'd say I think people born in the early 80s think of themselves as millennials. Anyone I know born in 82 or 83 thinks of them. I've never heard any of them think of themselves as Gen X. I think Gen X does end earlier. Certainly the beginning of Gen X is usually put at 64, 65, and I associate it with the Uranus-Pluto conjunction.
Okay.
If you're born before that conjunction, you're a boomer and boomers can also be broken down because my parents are boomers, but also people who are only 4 years older than me are boomers. So that's a whole other sort of situation in and of itself. But yeah, after the Uranus-Pluto conjunction of 65, 66 rather, I think there's a huge split, and that's where you really start to see Generation X as I recognize it. One big difference, I think, is if you're Gen X, you grew up watching color television. Like it was a thing. Whereas anything before you, like when I was growing up, I recognized any TV show that was made before I was born was black and white. And any show that came out after I was born was color, more or
Okay.
less.
All right.
The
You're
difference
gonna have to throw
between
stereotypes.
Gunsmoke and Star Trek or whatever.
Okay. So, yeah, there's definitely a certain zeitgeist about Gen X, and it's often not talked about, right? Because we are the smallest generation. However, it's funny because we're sandwiched between these two gigantic generations. It doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of us. There were a lot of us. We're only off by a few million on either side, but that really mattered. And so there was kind of this very small window where pop culture paid attention, or the societal culture paid attention to Gen X, and it was tended to be rather negative, in slackers and lazy and kind of these generalizations that obviously we've proven them wrong, but I just want to make sure everybody knows that there is no judgment on any of the other generations. We're just focusing on this one because it happens to be the one that we're in that nobody ever talks about. We get skipped over a lot. So we're going to give Gen X a little love today. That's why I'm wearing my my flannel. If it gets too hot, I may have to take it off.
There is something about Gen X that did sort of have a feeling of being cheated all along. I think is it was a big part of the Gen X thing. Really, sort of almost like being like as being kids of the boomers, it was sort of like you get a great Christmas present, but then your parents want to play with it all day, rather than let you have it. That was what like the 80s certainly felt like that, where you had like music videos, which should be for young people, but like it was all controlled by middle-aged people. And like the culture reflected that it was like middle-aged temperaments trying to manufacture adolescent entertainment. And the Gen X is the generation where you're like, yeah, no, I want my own thing, and really having to fight to snatch it out of the hands of the parents, as it were, which I think was kind of the Nirvana moment, where, the sort of the yeah, the culture and the industry and all that was seized, or snatched out of the hands of whoever we needed to snatch it out of the hands of. And that's like sort of part of the story that we had to fight just to have our youth, our culture.
Yeah. And it was
What was
kind of like
part of
we
it.
were born out of this um, commercialism, this commodification, right? So, we were sort of talking about the fact that like there was these big things that defined who Gen X is. And so some of those things is like when we had consciousness of like what was taking place, but there was also like what you were born into. And so we were talking about how, Pluto and Virgo people, the earlier Gen X, they were born into, the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War and sort of the assassinations of JFK and RFK and MLK, like all of this sort of new tensions that were coming out as the baby boomers were coming of age. And they were sort of like, we're going to remake society. But there was a lot of, it's not so easy to remake society. And so there was a lot of that upheaval. And then kind of a little later on, we had like, I was born like days after Nixon resigned. And so Watergate was kind of the preeminent thing that was happening in a lot of ways there. And like the women's rights movement, like, the ERA fight and things like that. So I think some of those things, what you're born into helps shape you. So you do want to talk about a little bit of some of the astrology of kind of these big movements and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean the big thing is in the 60s, indeed, you had like a lot of hope that grew very sort of dark over the course of a very short period of time. Really a result of that, following that break of Uranus and Pluto. I mean, that's exactly as those assassinations start to take place, is as that conjunction is really coming together. In the 70s, Uranus and Pluto are well, in the first half of the decade, they're both in Libra, but they're moving apart, and Uranus is moving away from Pluto. And you do like everything just seems a lot more sort of like radical and new. Everyone in the 1970s feels like they're living in a world they don't recognize, for better or for worse. And then by the second half, when Uranus goes into Scorpio, that's when things get very sort of splintered, and no one has a sort of a frame of reference until you get to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Libra that begins the 80s, and that happens co-present with Pluto, and you start to get some sense of direction, I suppose.
that's so interesting because I think then that really does speak to the fact that we kind of came into this new world with Roe v. Wade and birth control, like just being launched and used for the first time. When we're born, gender roles have a huge shift at that time. And we are the first generation where white women are entering the workforce in larger numbers. And so we're the first generation. Again, I know that there are African American people who had to deal with this, far longer than we did, but on a societal level in this country where suddenly who's taking care of the kids? And so that was a big theme where, like, I definitely was a latchkey kid. I grew up on TV. So, to your point with color TV, television became the babysitter. Television started raising us. So,
Mm.
again, here we have like, we are we're being raised by corporate executives at television networks in a lot of ways, right? And I was definitely the kid with the cereal in front of, like, you make your own breakfast and you make your own dinner because your parents are working, they're gone. And what do you think, the do you feel like it's really that Libra energy that was that shift, or do in that sense that there's new roles for men and women and nobody really knows how to deal with it yet, and the children are kind of just getting lost in the shuffle?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think after the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, there really was a sort of, it was such a renaissance, like in the literal sense, like renaissance means rebirth. That and adult populations felt like in such new terrain that they felt as childlike as the children. And I mean that's the thing about being Gen X is when we were 10 years old we were 30 and now we're in our 50s and we're 30. Like
Right.
you're
I feel
you know
that
you're
totally.
um um the arc of maturity gets really scrambled for us. Um, Boomers are people who invented the teenager. Like economically speaking, I mean the reason there were so many of them, which is why they're called boomers, and so many of them with disposable income that this whole corner of the economy was created for them to spend that money. And that was where you got your rock and roll and your beach parties and the bikinis and all that stuff. Whereas like the Gen X, like we get all that stuff lying around, but we didn't get to be teenagers in that same sort of arc of maturity. If you're a boomer, you're born a baby after the war with all this like expectation and hope placed on who you're going to be. You get to live in this new world that we just fought a war to have. Whereas by the time the Gen X people come around, it's like, yeah, I don't know, kid. Everyone for themselves, good luck surviving. Good luck figuring out where you need to be. So it's some of it really just does have to do with the world we come up in and what's expected of us.
So,
And
you mentioned
yeah,
boomers are Pluto and Leo, and they really are. I mean, it's very defined in a lot of ways. And so the Pluto and Leo people, like you said, the word Renaissance, and it really was this Renaissance of, we had power, especially in the United States for the first time, on a global level. And, there were all these new inventions with, television. Everyone started, and highways, there's all these like darker sides to everything that was taking place, but there was also this kind of like very exciting, hopeful time where people were, throughout the spans of it, right? As they came in, there was expectations, and we could do a whole thing on boomer
sure,
astrology,
good.
and I bet people would love that. Um, but I think that the Renaissance piece of it was like all of that music in the 60s, that, in the 50s and 60s that really took something that was, never been heard before, by a lot of white people, I should say, right? And then made it quite
Yeah.
popular. And but also with Leo, things centered around them, right? Like that's, Leo is the king. It's the hero. And there was this sense of, we're the heroes. And it's very hard now to then take a step back when you've had all of this, really big changes where it's like, oh, well, women can be equal, and oh, civil rights is important, and oh, now we can have free love, like all these kind of new concepts that were very people questioning the church, things like that were just very different. And now you throw kids into the mix and things had not settled out yet by any stretch.
Yeah, yeah. Really, really good point. I mean, that's the thing about boomers having Pluto and Leo. Yeah, that because they had strength in numbers, they really got to steer the ship of culture. First of all, like when they're young, like I said, there's all these industries, the Beatles aren't going to be selling records unless there are that many teenagers who want to buy them, and take up all that sort of that space in the culture. And then by the beginning of the 70s, the old movie industry is dying out, and the boomers are also taking over that industry, and their interests and their perspective and all that are sort of driving the narrative of the culture. By the time Gen Xers are becoming teenagers, the boomers are now in their 30s and 40s, but they're too old to be like, hip, young, and cool, but they're still sort of controlling that. Um, and then the whole thing about boomers becoming a sort of pejorative, if you will, that really comes up when they bump up against the next really big generation, which is the millennials. People who start to become adults at the turn of the new century, and then you really then you get like real rivals. The Gen X could never be a rival to the boomers the way millennials are.
Yes, that is a very interesting point. And that's when it starts to just sort of skip over us
Yeah.
altogether. And
Yeah.
I see that like, I see that even on astrology channels. And so talk a little bit then about, there's the Pluto Uranus conjunction. And then, then it starts to move away. And and again, like I assign no blame to any of this. This is all planetary energy, right? This is like what people are dealing with. The boomers were living in a whole new world. And how do you raise your kids if like you're out there trying to make you're really kind of living a life more for yourself. I mean, that really was what they were doing. And, I had a pool party, with some of my Gen X friends this weekend, and we were all talking about how like the role of how we parent versus how we were parented, it's pretty
Oh yeah.
universal that like, whatever kid, you know what I mean? Just I open the door, go play, right? Like there was no seat belts, there was no car seats when we were babies. And that's like, technology, but it also was kind of emblematic of this, like drinking out of a fire, garden hose, just here, have a sip of my beer, kid, like like,
Yep.
but
Yep.
that was all. You want to drive the car, sit on my lap, you know what I mean? Like, so in some ways we romanticize it, but then in other ways it was quite damaging because there's
Oh,
a lot of neglect, a lot of we're on our own here and no one's really paying attention, and so a lot of kind of unpleasant outcomes as a result of that. So, any thoughts on like where you think astrologically that fits in?
yeah. I mean that's a really good point. Again, I do think it's that post Uranus Pluto thing that it's almost like Gen X had such a sort of a power to it that grown-ups thought, yeah, yeah, for like when I was 6 years old, I was taking a city bus across Montreal to go to my grade school by myself every day. It blows my mind when I think about it. I was going, I had a bus pass. I could go all over Montreal after school, and I did. I was a latchkey kid. There was no one to greet me at home, so I was like an international tourist, if you will. I would take every city bus or every metro stop to, and
Six.
get out, like see the whole route and see the city. It was like traveling. And doing it at that age, it blows my mind. Um, and yeah, like it is quite typical of our generation. We had all this freedom, and yet as people raising kids, yeah, like the helicopter parents are absolutely Gen X. I have a friend back home. She was the teen who had like her own apartment. Like her mother had
Yep.
like a condo that had like this extra apartment. She had her own apartment. We envied her. She like had all the freedom. She went to the clubs a little younger than the rest of us did. She was that friend. Today, she is the helicopter mom of helicopter moms like none I've ever seen. Um, and so it's really interesting, like thinking of who she was as a teenager, where she was the freest Gen X, like the poster child Gen X teen with like your own apartment, um, real cachet. So it's very interesting to see how we've morphed in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways we always are like a reaction to our parents, every generation in some way.
Sure.
But, the benefits that we reaped from the independence and the resourcefulness that we were forced to, that Pluto and Virgo, that's some resourcefulness right there, like you're forced to figure it out, and one of the things that we were talking about before I came on. So yes, the good thing is I do think that we were all out, we couldn't wait to drive. We couldn't wait till we were 18 and we could get out of the house and I'm out of here, right? Like, I mean, and maybe that's not true for everybody, but there was not the failure to launch was not an issue with Gen Xers per se. It was much more of a like directionlessness because we were not guided and like told like here's how you get an internship, here's how you can, we kind of just had to figure it out on our own.
Yeah.
That was a big hallmark, I think.
Yeah, if I'm also ironically, if I'm not mistaken, in the States, when they moved the drinking age from 18 to 21, I think it was between people born between 64 and 65. Like if you were born in 64, you could drink when you're 18. If you were born in 65, you had to wait till you were 21. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. And I think that's an interest. I mean, I know it's very specific to the US, but it's another interesting sort of split between the two. Almost like, yeah, they were infantilizing Gen X right at the moment when they like reached the point that they'd always been living under. Like Gen X had always been grown-ups. And so suddenly the drinking age is changed just as they're coming of age is a very funny twist as well, I think.
That's an interesting point. When I look at, also some of the things I made a list of some of the things that impacted, I'm just going to list some of the things where, like the divorce explosion. That was another big thing. Um, Latchkey kids, which we talked about, video games, um, you know,
Video games. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, okay, there were kids, the friends of mine who skipped school and went to video arcades and spent all their time there. I did it occasionally. I skipped school a lot, but I didn't go to arcades much. I was only nominally interested. And all the grown-ups always talked about how video games were, going to rot your mind or
oh yeah,
like, nothing will come of you. I promise you, every friend of mine who skipped school and played video games wound up at some high-level tech job down the road. Like they were going to school. You know what I mean? That was the Gen X thing. The grown-ups thought like, oh, you're just being like an irresponsible juvenile delinquent. It's like, no, lady, I'm actually taking charge of my education and learning the things I'm really going to need to know to do well in the world. But it was such a funny way to arrive at that. But I mean, across the board, when I think about, the people I knew growing up, the ones who've done especially well for themselves are the ones who didn't go through the school system, but rather just like uh, um, yeah, taught themselves by going to the arcade and being engaged in the emerging technology and riding that, wave to the kinds of ends that we've seen.
What do you think about that independence? Like, do you feel like that was just forced upon us, or do you think there's something innate astrologically, a signature that you see?
I mean, I think
Just
it does to some degree. I mean, it must be the adults. The sensible, answer is like the adults were just in this kind of diluted state of extended, childhood and self-absorption. And I mean, those things are true, I'm sure. But I think there must have just been something about us that as kids that gave off the vibe that we could handle it. Like, yeah, I can take the bus across town, no problem. And it wasn't a problem. Like I could do it. It was a doable. I always knew what I was doing. I knew where I was going. I knew I had
yeah.
to be at school at 8 or whatever it was, and I knew what my dad took me on the bus the first couple of times and showed me the route, so I knew what I had to do, and then it was up to me. So yeah, I think it was probably a two-way street, and I think that there probably was something about us that made grown-ups think we could handle it, and largely it was true. I mean, it did work. It might be we might have grown into adults thinking like, holy moly, what were people thinking? But growing up, I didn't think like, oh, what are they doing? I can't handle this. Never had a moment's anxiety about not being able to handle any of that.
Yeah, I don't think you don't we have the awareness as kids to say this is too much. Like if it is what it is, you just do what is put in front of you. So the boomers were coming of into their power during Pluto and Scorpio. So
To some extent,
their
yeah.
economic power,
Politically,
their
yeah,
political
economically.
power, like I feel like that's when, suddenly they were, the greed is good, Wall Street, because there wasn't a
Mhm.
lot of economic power in the 70s. Like there was a lot, there was different kinds of power, like I said, but there was also disillusionment with the ERA failing, so a lot of women were, and then also there was a lot of strides made during civil rights, but then there was a lot of backlash. And then, here we have like OJ Simpson and Rodney King. Like I'm thinking about like when we're like teenagers and when we're kind of the things that shape us, right? I think of like the Challenger explosion, right? And I do think of things like Rodney King and the Oklahoma City bombings, and then really Reagan trickle down economics, and then the zeitgeist of like very much like greed is good and Wall Street and, cocaine and, all that kind of thing was the culture that we were coming up in.
Mhm.
But there was also AIDS.
Mhm.
And that was a very, and that's very Pluto and Scorpio. But that's like right when we're coming of age, at least, the Pluto and Libra
For
people,
sure.
when we're coming into our sexuality, potentially becoming sexually active. Oh, sex kills you.
Mm.
Like,
Right.
so I always wanted to be an astronaut when I was 8. And then, and when I was like 10, they wheel in the video, and then the Challenger goes up and like, oh, they're all dead. And now,
I
like,
remember that. I remember that. Yeah,
yeah,
the
like
the
we
chat
all
exactly. I mean
lost.
that the boomers got like you land on the moon. The Gen X got the Challenger blowing up.
Like your
The
teacher
bo-
in
the
space just died.
Right. Yeah. The boomers got, free love, free sex, that, you're on the pill, you don't need accountability is determined at your own, you determine your own level of it. Whereas we get like, yeah, this could kill you. This thing,
Sex
this
is
thing,
dangerous, and
yeah, this thing
like,
as teenagers that you're thinking about constantly and it's all you want to do. Yeah, that could kill you.
yeah, it was no
Good
longer
times.
just unwanted pregnancy. It was literally
Right.
like, like, oh, you could have AIDS. And like there was like people didn't know exactly. We knew that you could catch it. It was a sexually transmitted disease, but you didn't know how dangerous. And there was so much mythology around it too, and rumors and things like that, that it really was kind of it was put a real damper on things.
Yeah, no, it was a terrible thing that yeah, you know, in the day, like you had to be reading certain magazines to even know it was happening, because in the on the surface media, it wasn't discussed.
Right. Well, and that's kind of also the like the food that we were being fed. There's all these new convenience foods, right? Like, so you sort of look at, I feel like there is a little bit of a toxicity that we ingested, like with,
Mm.
you know, oh, here, eat Lunchables, here, eat like, you know, like everything was prepackaged suddenly. And, you know, we're making jokes about how much plastic is in our brains at this point, just because everything that we were eating was really just awful junk food. I mean,
And this is Pluto as well. This is Pluto. You know, Pluto is a 20th century planet. It's the planet of plastic. It makes big things small and small things big, including how much time it takes to prepare a meal and how much, you know, like all these things. Like Pluto will shift all these things out of whack. And I think especially the conjunction of Uranus and Pluto in the 60s, the way, you know, like we're the Saturday morning cartoon people, you know. The grown-ups there were some cartoons, but we're like the full-on cartoon culture kids, where, you know, tricks are for kids, and you know, the
Fruity Pebbles
commercials, the
without
sugar, yeah.
chocolate.
Yeah, like that full on kind of thing. And that is where you know, we're just at least like the boomers, sure, they were eating the cornflakes, and the, you know, there was some sense of like uh, um you were getting a healthy breakfast. With us, it was just like, hey kids, sugar. Sold to you by a rabbit who acts like he's a criminal, or, you know, whatever.
He's like
Um,
a rabbit on crack.
yeah, exactly. You know, whatever, like just like zany stuff. Um, yeah, and I think that, you know, that's where it starts.
So, okay, so it starts there. So let's say we talk about, you know, now actually, and you're the human ephemeris, not me. So,
Yeah.
talk to me about we've got with the trine coming up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
have we had any other major thing in between there between Pluto and Uranus that I need to know about? See, this is human ephemeris time.
Well, in the 60s, the Uranus-Pluto conjunction was sextile Neptune.
Okay.
Pluto and Neptune have been sextile for much of the 20th century coming into the 21st. Neptune and Pluto had been conjunct at the end of the 19th century in 1893. But they moved into a sextile pretty quickly by the 40s, you know. And since the 40s, so that's the thing, like virtually everyone alive now has a natal Neptune-Pluto sextile, which is pretty wild. The orbit of Pluto is very warped and skewered. You know, it spends a very long amount of time in Taurus and a short amount of time in Scorpio. And so because of that, we've had this extended period of a Neptune-Pluto sextile. All the boomers have it, all the Gen X have it, all the millennials have it, all the Gen Z and Zoomers and what have you have it. Um, and even children born, you know, right now have it. So like we still have it. It is eventually going to start moving out, but it covers quite a group of people, to the point that, yeah, you have to be in your 90s to not have that sextile in your chart. I guess Joe Biden doesn't have it, but, you know, Bernie Sanders doesn't have it. Um, but that's about it.
What do
Just
you
those
talk
two
about?
guys.
So talk a little bit about the Neptune Pluto sextile, like what you think
Yeah.
societally that society implication.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting on reflection. I mean, for it to have lasted that length of time, um, really, I mean, shows how we absorbed this sort of this new world and this new normal in a very fast and easy way. You know, like when you think about it, the Second World War was just devastating. And you would have thought it would have taken, you know, decades to rebuild things. But as a matter of fact, a new order, came into being and was quite functional. I mean, there were problems, obviously, but the bounce back and the way things were sort of reshaped, seemingly for the better, was formidable, and virtually everyone alive um, would understandably have taken that for granted because it's the only world any of us have ever known. In some ways, it was the moment that Neptune went from Leo into Virgo, which was in 1927-28,
Okay.
that the sextile to Pluto in Cancer started. Like you could say, like if there's a starting, I mean, the sextile isn't really in orb until the 1940s, until the war is ending. But you can say that with Neptune moving into Virgo and Pluto being in Cancer, as of that moment, they are sextile by sign anyway, and that is when films become talkies. But it's also when television is being invented, and it's when PA systems are becoming a thing. I mean, part of the reason Hitler becomes who he is because out of, suddenly he can speak to a stadium full of people and his voice can be amplified. This is very Pluto stuff. Again, makes big things small, small things big. One man's voice being able to be amplified so a whole stadium of people can actually hear what he's saying. And it can be, filmed and recorded, and people can see the image and hear the sound at the same time. This is all coming into being as Pluto's being discovered and as Neptune is moving into a sign that is sextile Pluto. And the world that that we all know really, is just coming into being.
Yeah, it's so different, right? We take for, like you said, we take for granted that there are highways and cars and movies and television and dishwashers, but not that much in the scheme of history. There were dark skies and we washed our clothes on, rocks, and
Yeah.
like it's very different what we have now. And so I was talking to another astrology friend of mine who is also a friend of yours, Frederick Woodruff.
Oh yeah.
And we were talking about how much it's become more in our awareness that technology changes and evolves very quickly, but humans don't. Like humans are still humans and we adapt, but the evolution, it's still kind of this wheel. And that's why we
Mm.
see history repeat itself time and again, because it takes a long time to evolve, even though you can invent things, the actual evolution. So talk a little bit about, so it sounds like, and I appreciate you bringing this to this conversation, that one of the biggest things you see for Gen X is that Uranus Pluto conjunction and the
Oh yeah.
aftermath, and kind of
Yeah.
like the shaking out of, like, because Uranus, for those watching, like it's lightning strikes, it's an earthquake, it's change, it's revolution, it's big things happening. And Pluto is transformation. And so when you get those two together, that'll rock your world. That's like huge transformation quickly. And that's what, like, the birth control pill did. That's what, a lot of these things that we were born into are the aftermath of this huge change. And so that's why, like, I don't entirely blame boomers and be like, oh, you were a horrible parent,
No.
right? Like, they were born
No.
into a time and they had their things they dealt with, and millennials have their things and we have our things we deal with. And that's what all this is about. So don't, say to me, hey,
Oh
whiny Gen X,
yeah.
like,
I
no, I know, like, everybody's got their specific things, their crosses to bear, shall I say.
Yeah, no, I certainly, it must be emphasized as astrologers. I don't, I think we of all people can't be blaming people for anything. I mean, because people have their charts, and it's not a matter of whether or not people are going to be, damaged and dark and terrible. It's just in what ways are they going to be damaged and dark and terrible, and that's part of what we analyze. So yeah, I certainly hope. I don't think we've been picking on anyone.
I hope not either, but I always
No,
know
that
people
hasn't
get
been.
sensitive and, and one
Well,
of the things,
I don't think we've said anything that should be
okay,
that provocative.
okay.
Um, there was one other thing I wanted to say. Oh, well, just with regard to the trine now and how
Yeah.
that relates to us. Yeah, I mean, it is a time, ironically, because here we are middle aged and we're supposed to be getting very rigid and set in our ways. But I think times being what they are, we're going to see Gen X, relative to what is usual for people our age, go through a lot of sort of change and upheaval, not unlike adolescence, except except done by menopausal or balding people. Apart from that, dentures and so on and so forth. That yeah, there is something certainly like our relationship to technology is very different. We're not the same sort of Luddites that a lot of boomers can be. Although, admittedly, my parents are not boomer Luddites by any stretch, but they're both Geminis with the sun close to Uranus, so they're good with the technology. But yeah, we're the generation of people who are used to technology, who always knew how to program a VCR, in the '80s, or knew about computers in the '90s, and so on and so forth, and in terms of the way things are changing, we'll be a far more adaptable older uh, um, generation to cultural and technological shifts than a lot of our predecessors have been.
So some of the hallmarks of Gen X that one of the things I think before we got on, I was talking to you about that Gen X and specifically Gen X men, but like also, Gen X women, but Gen
Mm,
X men, Gen X white men were the largest cohort that voted for our current president. Um,
right.
and a lot of that, when I talk to some people that I know that were fall in that category, there is kind of this anger that's a little bit more sublimated. Like they don't say they're angry, they don't admit they're angry, they don't admit they're fearful. But there is this sense of like, well, Social Security won't be there for us. And, like we've all seen the healthcare system spiral out of control and into the gutter, in the past couple decades. And so there is this sense of being, manufacturing left, like all the, kind of societal ills that then, people, especially without a college degree, and I think that AI is coming for the college degree people, but like, to date, it's been, people without a college degree that the pensions got taken away. Like all the benefits, all of the things that built and made this country great were just being taken away systematically. And so there's this anger and just this desire for something new. Do you have any thoughts on that from like, because I do think that the Gen Xers are on the front lines. I think everyone's impacted, but I think the Gen Xers were on the front lines of the first generation of, again, like, the jobs that you were supposed to grow into. Oh, now they're overseas. Like, and we talk about manufacturing, but customer service was a very big job for women. And that all was offshored to India and places like that.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right, and I think that's a big part of why we do wind up being more adaptable to the changing times, is because we're forced to, because things aren't sort of in place and in order for us uh, to count on the way our parents had. And so for exactly that reason, we have to be thinking outside the box, um, and I mean when you're thinking about the anger, um, hum a few bars of "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and then hum a few bars of "Smells Like Teen Spirit." Think of Cobain, screaming at the end, as
I
opposed
still
to
love
the beat.
I still love
As
those
oh, I love it,
songs. I
but
still
Look, I love the Beatles and Nirvana, but you know, you have the Beatles sort of ending their song on like the three-part harmony note, or you know, Kurt with his face in the video camera screaming his lungs out. It kind of, um, you know, we didn't make that song a hit for nothing. And it was saying something that I guess, you know, that we're still trying to say.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I've never had a minute of my life thinking that any of these systems would be in place. And up until 2025, I was merely being cynical. Now I can say I was being realistic. Until 2025, though, I was being cynical because those things were in place. And what are you talking about, Nick? Always going to the dark side. Now it's like, no, you know, that was always a correct conclusion. Um,
I
you
wonder,
know,
that's so interesting. Okay, go on. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no,
something.
no, go ahead.
Well, it's so interesting because it's like we are known for going to the dark side. We are known for our cynicism. And we did come of age really like where we got our, like kind of youthful power 20s, Pluto and Scorpio, right? Like that. And so it's kind of like when we kind of come into the world to say like, hey, here, we're here, pay attention to us. That brief moment that was Pluto and Scorpio in a lot of ways and that's some dark stuff, right? Like,
I used to have a joke that, you know, like why use astrology to predict the future? Why not just be cynical? You'll be right just as often. You know, and it's like a kind of a terrible joke and a terrible thing to say. But you know, there's some truth there. Um, and that kind of is what 2025 is sort of like seeing your worst suspicions confirmed. You know, I've had a few of those moments now that I'm in my 50s, and it's not like a told you so or like a you know a self gratifying you know moment like you know to do a flex or whatever. It's really it's depressing. It's like, oh no, I should have been wrong. I should have been the cynical asshole, and instead I just called it, you know. And that is and it is a very kind of Gen X mentality, I think, you know?
it's so funny. Like, I'm in the same boat as you where it's like I'm depressed about everything that's happening. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, okay, here we are.
Yeah.
Like, I did a video the other day where I was like, yeah, because people are like, well, what do I do? And I'm like, you get up and you make breakfast. Like, that's it. Like, what do you mean? What are you gonna do? Like,
Yeah.
that's it. And in some ways, we've done a disservice to our kids being the helicopter parents. I mean, we generally wanted to protect them because no one protected us. But a lot of times, like I will, my teenage son will be like, Mom, you give me some water. I'm like, no, get your own water. Like, what are you talking about? Like, start to make your own lunch. Like, like this sort of like the world is a tough place. And I think that's one of the benefits that we have is lower expectations in some ways,
Yeah.
less
Yeah. Which are
disappointment.
yeah, which are easier in your 50s than it was in our 20s, you know. I mean, that's part of the
That's true
Saturn
for
transit.
everybody. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's true for everybody. But I think one of the things that I still get chafed about is being constantly skipped and ignored. And I can only think that is because both Virgo and Libra are very people pleaser um, signs. As someone who has a Virgo moon and lots of Libra in her chart,
Mm.
it's in general, it's a like, I don't want to cause you trouble. Neither of them are trying to make trouble. They may have, Virgo likes to make things better. Virgo can be critical. Virgo can be cynical. Libra can be, like, can't we all get along? I'm the, a lot of people probably in the Gen X were the, peacemakers in their family. They're the ones who tried to broker peace between their moms and their dads, or, or saw the challenges of divorce. And a lot of kids that I
Oh,
grew up with were on the front lines of that divorce. And, it wasn't shared custody in the way that they have it today. There wasn't like trying to make it work for the kids. It was like, oh, I'll see you next summer. The mom got the custody and then the dad tended to move away with his girlfriend or whatever. And it was like, oh, I go hang out with my dad in the summers or something. It was a very different sort of setup than today. So I think
yeah.
something to
Yeah,
say.
I mean, we were the generation, we might have been the peacemakers, but we were the generation who, turned rock music into heavy metal, who turned soul music into, gangster rap. Like we took these art forms that the boomers loved and turned them into these sort of dark, hard, mechanical versions of their former
I
selves.
think Libra has a very dark side. I think people like
Yeah.
don't give Libra's dark side enough.
It's the exaltation of Saturn. It's about like having a standard that you have to measure up to. Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. Yeah, and maybe that's part of our what we were born into, like astrologically, is both of those signs. There's a standard, and maybe on some level that's part of our karma is to really be that independent, strong, just kind of like, yeah, this is
Yeah.
reality. Let's embrace it. So, okay, well, anything else you wanted to sort of riff on or talk about before we close
No,
out?
no. I mean, it's a subject that you can never stop talking about, but you have to draw the line somewhere.
Yes.
It's an
Okay.
introduction. Uranus has only just gone in there, so there'll be plenty more to say as things develop.
Yeah, and I think with the trine, I think that there is some reason for optimism to see that there's like a full circle moment. Like you said, like almost like maybe a validation. It can be a validation of cynicism, but it can also be a validation of hard work or a lifetime spent. There can be these, new changes that are on the horizon that might be beneficial in some ways that we can't predict. So everyone, don't forget that Nick is doing a special on his readings.
That, that's right. nickdaganbest.com/consultations. Use the promo code Uranus for a 25% rebate that ends July 21st. My rates are going to be going up as of my birthday, August 14th. So also, even after the special ends, there'll only be a few weeks to get me at the old rate. And please, if you like the work I do, I'm going to be releasing a trailer of Uranus USA, what is the second edition of my book, but now in video form, and I'm very excited about it. I've been working a long time to get everything up to the standard I want it to be at. So if you like what I do, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/nickdaganbest, and you can get early access to the videos. And I'll also set up a Discord where we have Discord chats for Patreon members to discuss episodes and astrology and what have you. And of course, like and subscribe my videos, please, and show your support. And thank you so much, Dabney. Thank you for having me back. It's really fun talking.
Yeah, you're always welcome back. So definitely keep me posted. And yeah, we would love to have you comment below and tell us some of your favorite Gen X memories or any thoughts you have on the astrology of Gen X. And just kind of anything that comes to mind. Always subscribe, share. It really does help people like Nick and I who are scraping out a living as astrologers. And yeah, so there's a
Singing for our supper.
yeah, exactly. So that reminds me to plug my course, half off in the month of July. It's got lots of good feedback on it. So all of that information is going to be below. And as always, there's a reason and a season for it all. And the universe is conspiring to help us. And even as Gen Xers, there is a reason why we got what we got. And there's so many beautiful things that we can say at the end of the day. We are some tough, badass mofos. So
That's right.
it's not all sadness. It's like we're some strong generation. Okay. Thanks,
With the
everyone.
lights out, it's less dangerous.
Have a good one.